August 21st, 1983. Final 4 p.m. China Airlines Flight 81 touchdown at Manila International Airport. On board was the man Ferdinand Marcos feared most in the world. Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr., the charismatic opposition leader who had spent 3 years in exile, was coming home to challenge the dictator who had imprisoned him for 7 years. Ninoy never made it past the airplane stairs. At 1:15 p.m., a single gunshot ended his life and changed Philippine history forever. But this wasn't just an assassination. This was the moment Ferdinand Marcos signed his own political death warrant. What happened in those 11 minutes between landing and death would trigger the largest funeral in Philippine history, ignite a revolution that would topple a 20-year dictatorship, and prove that sometimes, killing your enemy makes them more powerful than they ever were alive. By 1983, 11 years into martial law, the Marcos regime was cracking. The economy was collapsing. Foreign debt had reached $24 billion, and people were starting to whisper the name that terrified Marcos, Ninoy Aquino. Ninoy wasn't just another politician. Where Marcos ruled through fear, Ninoy inspired through hope. Before martial law, he had been the youngest senator in Philippine history, groomed to run for president in 1973. Political observers believed he would have won easily. That's why, when martial law was declared in 1972, Ninoy Aquino was arrest number 1. 7 years in prison should have broken him. Instead, prison made him stronger. He became a symbol of resistance, the voice of everyone silenced by martial law. In 1980, Marcos allowed him to travel to the United States for heart surgery. From Boston and New York, Ninoy spoke at universities, met with world leaders and testified before U.S. Congress. He became the international face of the anti-Marcos movement. Then his presence from exile was eating away at Marcos's power. People listened to his voice on cassette tapes, read his words on smuggled pamphlets. By early 1983, Marcos faced the perfect storm. The economy was collapsing, opposition groups were becoming bolder, and from Boston, Ninoy was planning his return home. The decision wasn't impulsive. Marcos's intelligence knew about these plans. They knew when he was returning, and they knew his return would unite the opposition and end their regime. Marcos understood Ninoy alive in exile was a problem. But Ninoy alive in the Philippines would unite the opposition and provide leadership that could challenge Marcos's power directly. The original plan was simple: arrest Ninoy immediately, charge him with subversion, put him back in prison. But Ninoy had coordinated with international media and opposition supporters. His arrest would trigger massive protests and be verdicts globally. That's when someone suggested the third option. The option that would make Ninoy disappear forever. August 21st, 1983. 10:30 a.m. China Airlines Flight 811 began its descent toward Manila International Airport. Among the passengers was Ninoy Aquino, traveling under an assumed name but making no real effort to hide his identity. He had been talking to fellow passengers throughout the flight, discussing his plans to return to politics, his hopes for Philippine democracy, and his belief that change was coming to his country. What Ninoy didn't know was that his every move had been tracked since the moment he boarded the plane in Taipei. Philippine intelligence agents were in contact with airport security, military commanders and government officials. Everyone knew Ninoy Aquino was coming home. Everyone knew what was supposed to happen when he did. At 11:11 a.m., the final preparations began at Manila International Airport. Security was tightened. Unauthorized personnel were cleared from the terminal. Military vehicles were positioned around the airport perimeter, and a special security detail was assembled to escort Ninoy from the airplane to the terminal. The plan was simple. The moment Ninoy stepped off the plane, he would be surrounded by security guards and taken directly to a government vehicle. No media interviews. No contact with supporters. No opportunity for any kind of demonstration. He would be whisked away quickly and quietly, and then the problem would be solved permanently. But plans, even the best plans, require perfect execution. And what happened next was anything but perfect. And when 4 p.m. Flight 811 landed at Manila International Airport. As the plane taxied to the gate, Ninoy could see through the windows that the terminal was surrounded by military vehicles and security personnel. He turned to the journalist traveling with him and said something that would become legendary. "You have to be very ready with your camera because this action can be very fast. In a matter of 3 or 4 minutes it could be all over, and I may not be able to talk to you again."
4:10 p.m. The airplane door opened. Philippine security guards immediately boarded the plane and identified Ninoy. They informed him that he was under arrest and would be taken directly to a government facility. No media interviews would be permitted. No contact with supporters would be allowed. He was to come with them immediately and quietly.
Ninoy complied. He gathered his belongings, said goodbye to the journalists, and prepared to disembark. But he also did something else. He put on a bulletproof vest that he had been carrying in his luggage. When asked about it later by investigators, his widow Corey would say that Ninoy had been warned by multiple sources that there might be an assassination attempt. On 13 p.m., Ninoy Aquino stepped off the airplane, flanked by 3 security guards. The plan was to walk him quickly down the airplane stairs, across the tarmac to a waiting van, and away from the airport before any media or supporters could see him. But as they reached the bottom of the stairs, something went wrong.
1:15 p.m.
A single gunshot rang out across the tarmac. Ninoy Aquino collapsed on the airport tarmac, blood pooling beneath his head. Within seconds, more gunshots followed as security guards allegedly shot and killed Rolando Galman, a man they claimed was the assassin. But here's what eyewitnesses saw that didn't match the official story. Ninoy was shot in the back of the head at close range while completely surrounded by government security guards. Galman, the alleged assassin, was unarmed when he was gunned down, and the entire incident happened so quickly and in such a controlled area that it was impossible for any unauthorized person to get close enough to fire the fatal shot. The conclusion was obvious to everyone, except the government investigators. Ninoy Aquino wasn't killed by a lone gunman. He was executed by the same security detail that was supposed to protect him. The news of Ninoy's assassination spread through Manila like wildfire. By evening, thousands of people had gathered at the airport, demanding to know what happened. By the next morning, the numbers had grown to tens of Athens. Within a week, the entire country knew that Ferdinand Marcos had killed the most beloved opposition leader in the Philippines. But the real impact of the assassination wasn't immediate. It was what happened next that changed everything. Ninoy's widow, Corazon Corey Aquino, made a decision that transformed her husband's death from a tragedy into a catalyst for revolution. Instead of accepting condolences quietly and retreating from public life, she decided to make Ninoy's funeral a public event. Not just public, but a national demonstration of opposition to the Marcos regime. August 31, 1983, 6:00 a.m. 10 days after the assassination, Ninoy's funeral procession began from Santo Domingo Church in Quezon City, and made its way through Manila to Manila Memorial Park. But this wasn't just a funeral. It was the largest anti-government demonstration in Philippine history. 2 million people lined the streets. 2 million people who had been silenced by martial law for 11 years found their voice in mourning for Ninoy Aquino. They carried yellow ribbons, sang protest songs, and chanted Ninoy, Hindi ka nag-iisa. Ninoy, you are not alone. The procession took 11 hours to complete what should have been a 2-hour journey. Television cameras from around the world broadcast images of ordinary Filipinos openly defying the Marcos regime for the first time since. The message was clear. Martial law was over, whether Marcos admitted it or not. But more than the size of the funeral, it was the emotional impact that shook the regime to its core. Filipinos who had been afraid to speak Ninoy's name publicly were now crying openly in the streets. People who had accepted martial law as a necessary evil were now questioning everything they had been told about the Marcos government. Most importantly, Corey Aquino emerged from the funeral not just as a widow, but as a leader. Standing beside her husband's coffin, speaking to the massive crowd, she became the living symbol of everything Ninoy had represented. And unlike her husband, she had something even more powerful than charisma. She had martyrdom by proxy. The assassination of Ninoy Aquino did exactly what Marcos had hoped it would do. It eliminated his most dangerous political opponent. But it also did something Marcos never anticipated. It created something more dangerous than any individual politician. A movement. The Yellow Revolution had begun. Not the violent communist revolution that Marcos claimed to be fighting, but a peaceful democratic revolution led by a housewife who had never held political office. Revolution that would culminate 2.5 years later in people power, the massive demonstrations that would drive Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos from the Philippines forever. Because here's the thing about martyrs, you can kill the person, but you can't kill what they represent. And what Ninoy Aquino represented, democracy, hope, the belief that change was possible, was more powerful dead than alive. The investigation into Ninoy's assassination became a farce. The official commission concluded that he had been killed by Rolando Galman, acting alone. But everyone knew this was a lie. The evidence was overwhelming that the assassination had been planned and executed by government agents acting on orders from the highest levels of the regime. More importantly, everyone knew that Ferdinand Marcos had given the order. Maybe not directly, maybe not explicitly, but certainly by creating the atmosphere where killing Ninoy Aquino was seen as necessary for regime survival. In the months following the assassination, everything began to unravel for Marcos. The economy continued to deteriorate. International allies abandoned the regime. Opposition groups became bolder and more organized, and Cory Aquino began her transformation from grieving widow to political leader. The final irony of the Ninoy Aquino assassination is that it achieved the exact opposite of what it was intended to achieve. Instead of eliminating opposition to Marcos, it united the opposition under a single banner. Instead of intimidating potential dissidents, it inspired millions of Filipinos to join the resistance. Instead of strengthening the regime, it exposed its brutality to the world. Ferdinand Marcos spent the last 3 years of his rule trying to recover from the political damage caused by those 11 minutes at Manila International Airport. He declared an end to martial law while retaining all emergency powers. He called snap elections to prove his popularity. He made cosmetic reforms to appease international critics, but nothing worked. Because in killing Ninoy Aquino, Marcos had killed something in himself as well. He had proven that his power rested not on popular support or democratic legitimacy, but on fear and violence. And once people stop being afraid, dictators have nothing left. February 25, 1986. 2.5 years after Ninoy's assassination, Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos fled the Philippines as 2 million Filipinos surrounded the presidential palace. The People Power Revolution, led by Cory Aquino and inspired by the memory of her martyred husband, had achieved what 11 years of martial law could not. It had united the Filipino people. As their helicopter lifted off from Malacañang Palace, Ferdinand Marcos looked down at the crowds celebrating in the streets and perhaps understood, finally, what he had done on August 21, 1983. In trying to eliminate his greatest enemy, he had created his greatest mistake. Today, August 21st, is a national holiday in the Philippines. Ninoy Aquino Day commemorates not just the man who died at Manila International Airport, but the moment when the Filipino people decided they had had enough of dictatorship. Manila International Airport was renamed Ninoy Aquino International Airport in 19... Travelers arriving in the Philippines today walk through the same terminal where Ninoy was murdered, past monuments and markers that tell the story of his sacrifice and its impact on Philippine history. And at the exact spot where Ninoy fell on the airport tarmac, there is a simple marker with words that capture the essence of what happened on that August afternoon. The Filipino is worth dying for. Those were Ninoy's words, spoken often during his exile, repeated in his final interviews, and proven true by his death. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a leader can do is die for what they believe in. Sometimes the most effective way to defeat a dictator is to force them to reveal their true nature to the world. August 21st, 1983, 5:15 p.m. 1 gunshot, 11 minutes. A decision that changed everything. Ferdinand Marcos thought he was eliminating a threat. Instead, he was creating a legacy that would outlast his regime, outlast his life, and outlast his place in history. Ninoy Aquino came home to challenge a dictator. He died on the airport tarmac, but his death challenged something much more powerful than Ferdinand Marcos. It challenged the Filipino people to decide what kind of country they wanted to live in. 2.5 years later, they gave their answer, and Ferdinand Marcos didn't like what he heard.